Welcome to Symposiac's vodcast. And uh, we're gonna talk about, or at least we're gonna address a question that was asked by one of someone who occasionally, right, views our vodcast, right? And I don't think even think he's from California, right? He's not from California.
He lives in Washington.
Washington, okay, right. So he lives in Washington, and then he sent a question to, or at least suggested a question for us to address. And so that's what we're gonna do tonight. We're gonna address it, and then once we're done addressing the question, then we'll be done for today. And again, I want to encourage people too. If you have questions that you want us to address, just send us the question, and then we will try to answer it the best we can. Now, I think the question that we received from the guy is a question that came from an atheist, and then probably Laurence will say a few more things about the person if he wants to. And so we take this question seriously. I think I take this kind of questions seriously, especially if there are questions from people who are, who disbelieve God or disbelieve the Christian faith. And so, yeah, so that's, and then next week, I want you to be excited to actually join us next week because we are going to have a special guest next week. He is, I think we can call him Father, but if I'm mistaken here, I'll correct myself next time, right? It's Father Dr. Or Reverend Dr. Ananias Sorem. He's an Eastern Orthodox a priest. And next week we're gonna talk about what is Eastern Orthodox Church, and in what sense understanding the Eastern Orthodox Church might help us understand what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now, because Russia and Ukraine are both dominated by countries that are dominated by Eastern Orthodox people. Okay. And for those of us here in the U.S., or probably even those people who are from the Philippines, we are very unfamiliar with the Eastern Orthodox Church. Okay, and so I think it's a good thing to be familiar with the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's actually the third largest Christian group, right? So first one are the Catholics, and then the Protestants, combining all the denominations, Protestant denominations, and then thirdly, actually the Eastern Orthodox Church or churches. And then not just that, but historically, right? They are actually, in some sense, in line with probably the Apostolic Church as well, right? That's how when they were separated from the Roman Catholic Church, right? So those are the two divisions, right? That occurred, or at least a division that occurred, right, in the past. Probably that's one of the major division, one of the well, probably the first major division in the church, right? The division between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches. And so probably it's good for us to understand that religion, given that historically it has, it's part of the deep roots of Christianity, just like the Roman Catholic Church. The Protestantism is new, right? This is like probably the youngest of the three, uh, and probably the more correct one. I'm just kidding. But so you will have an opportunity to actually see a Protestant, right, a Catholic, right, and an Eastern Orthodox person. Okay, so I hope you'll join us next week. Now, so today we wanted to ask the question. I'm sorry, I'm sniffling because I have allergy right now because of the weather. But the question I want that was asked, at least this is how I frame it, and then after this, I'm gonna let Laurence talk. I'm gonna let him do it first. The way I rephrased the question. So, what would it take for me or Laurence, right, to give up my belief or his belief in Christianity or Catholicism or Protestantism, right, or give up his belief in theism or the belief in God? And I'll start with that, and then I'll let Laurence talk right now. Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I can't answer the question without bringing in a little bit of the theological background that I am committed to, or at least my understanding of I guess my preferential theological persuasions within Roman Catholicism. I mean, I believe, and well, I don't think it's just my belief. I think it's in the various catechisms. It's in the new modern Catechism of the Catholic Church from 1992. It's in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. It's alluded to or spoken of directly in the Summa Theologica. But faith is a gift. It's a gift from God, right? And so, I mean, there's passages talking about those who are called, those who are elect, those who are, sanctified and glorified. I mean, there's this whole certain progression there of the sort of larger groups that start becoming smaller and smaller. Manifesting this group called the predestined, right? Those who are elected to salvation, right? And so these are the folks who are called by God and moved by God and decided by God to be saved before all time. And that's my personal belief. That's my understanding of how it works. I mean, I do think that is dogma in the Catholic Church, the doctrine or the dogma of predestination. And the thing about it, though, is I don't know if I'm in that group, as opposed to some, Protestant groups who believe, once saved, always saved doctrine, or they know that they're the elect because they're, they answered the altar call and things like that. So they have a certain assurance of salvation. But from a Catholic perspective, we don't have assurances. Now, you might ask a Catholic, do you know you're going to heaven? Now, they might say yes, because they've interacted a lot with, evangelical Christians or Protestant Christians, whatever, and they get their theology mixed up and they don't fully understand Catholic teaching. So my claim would be that the Catholic teaching is that nobody is really truly assured of salvation. You might have a certain confidence about your salvation because, let's say, there are sacraments in the Catholic Church, like confession and communion, right? So the idea of knowing, of being saved, is this doctrine called justification, right? So you are justified when you receive baptism. You're baptized in Christ. You die into his death, and you're resurrected to life by when you rise out of the waters of baptism. But sometimes you still mess up throughout your life, and so you commit sins. And there are some sins that we call mortal sins in Catholicism. And so if you commit a mortal sin, you destroy that life of grace, that justification, that relationship you have with God. And so you need to be restored, and you are restored through the sacrament of confession or reconciliation. And then you're justified again. So you have kind of a reasonable confidence that if a piano were to drop on you right out of the confessional, you're probably going to go to heaven. I mean, but it's not the same as like this assurance of, being saved. All right. All that to say that grace, faith is a gift. And so because I have faith, or at least the way I operate in my day-to-day right now is I have the faith of a Catholic, right? And so, but I don't know if I'm going to maintain that throughout the rest of my life, and ultimately at the last moments of my life. And who knows, I might turn against God in the last moments of my life, in which case I'd be lost. I'd be reprobate, right? So, and it doesn't have to be at the end of my life. Well, it'll certainly be the moment that matters. But I could come and go, right? I might come into the church. I came back to the church in 2002, 2003, but I left again. Not really left, but I stopped sort of practicing going to Mass every Sunday about 5 or 6 years ago for a period of about a year or so. Was I an atheist? No, but for whatever reason, sort of my human, fleshly, I guess you can say, weariness of practicing Christianity was weighed pretty heavily around that time, and so I stopped practicing. Now, I didn't, like I said, I didn't become an atheist again, but I certainly stopped practicing. So in all practical ways, I was basically an atheist for a period of time, a few years ago. So what does it take? I mean, in my situation, it was a weariness about what was going on politically in the church. It might have been my laziness in going back to confession, or reconciling with the obligations of the church. It could be a number of reasons, but ultimately it's not the details that matter of why I leave and come back or persevere. It's that the belief is that grace is what motivates. Grace is what moves the person to move towards and sometimes away from God. And so the question doesn't exactly quite apply in the way it's asked. I think there's an assumption there that it's kind of a human decision that you're making. Like, all I'm waiting for is evolution to give me, proof beyond a shadow of a Christian doubt, for those who believe in creationism, that then I'll just dispense with all of Christian belief. Well, there's a lot of theistic evolutionists who are still Christians, so that won't make me an atheist again. For some people, it's a tragic loss in their family, and I've had losses in the last year or so. They were fairly close to me in my life. I'm still here. Would it take a closer loss? Like a child or a significant other, a wife, a girl, whatever it may be. Is that what it's going to take? I don't know. I guess I can't. I don't know until I cross that bridge, I suppose. But it certainly hasn't been enough. There hasn't been enough life tragedy that has caused me to question whether God exists, or should I leave Catholicism. I know I've been talking a lot. Maybe I need to think about it a little bit more to be a little bit more specific, because I know there was two levels there. The question was asked, what would it take for me to leave Catholicism specifically? But what would it also take for me to leave theism, right? Because there might be a reason why I would leave Catholicism and still maybe be a Protestant, or be an Eastern Orthodox, or maybe be a minimalist Christian who just believes that Jesus was a good philosophical teacher, and I'll just try to be good to people, and that's enough of a gospel for me to rule my life. But also the other question would be, what would it take for me to lose faith in God in general?
Oh, yeah. So no, actually, I don't find a lot of things to disagree with here, except probably the predestination part. But I think you're right when you said that it has something to do with God's grace, right? That it has some kind of a gift, right? And I think I will agree with that, and I think that is probably the basis of my belief as well. And it should be surprising to some people that arguments do not seem to play a role, right, in why we were even persuaded to believe to begin with. Because I don't think it really has anything to do with the arguments, right? Because the starting point doesn't seem to be about whether we can argue or prove God's existence here. And so whatever it is I'm going to say right now in response to the question, it's very similar to what Laurence already pointed out. Now, so let me repeat the question here the way I'm framing it, and then I'm gonna give my response, and then probably Laurence can respond to what I wanted to say here. I have some notes here that I wrote before we started the vodcast, so that to guide my thought about this matter. So the question was, this was asked by one of our viewers, occasional viewers, a viewer. and he wants us to answer this question, and that's what we're going to do for this podcast today. It's just tonight is just to respond to this question. So the question is, what would it take for me or for Laurence to give up my or his belief in the Christian faith, or probably in particular in Catholicism or Protestantism or theism? Now, so let me approach this question I think the question presupposes what in philosophy is commonly known as doxastic voluntarism. So, doxastic is a term that came from the Greek word doxa, which means belief. So there is some kind of an issue, right, in philosophy called doxastic voluntarism. Do we have voluntary control about the belief that we have? So that's actually that's the point here, right? So in varying degrees, right, the doxastic agent has voluntary control over at least some of his beliefs. So that's at least the belief of some doxastic voluntarist, that a doxastic agent, the one who is actually believing a belief, has some kind of voluntary control in varying degrees, right? Of course, someone who is probably much more educated about a certain issue will have more control over what he or she will end up believing than those who are completely unfamiliar about the issue. I hope I'm making sense here, right, when I say that. So at least some of the beliefs might be under some of our voluntary control. But the problem here is that many philosophers and scientists seem to think that we are mostly involuntarist, right, when it comes to believing. So instead of claiming that we do have voluntary control, now some philosophers and scientists claim that it looks like for the most part we are involuntarist. And sometimes some philosophers will even reject the very possibility of doxastic voluntarism. Now, the reason why I'm explaining this, because this is actually somehow presupposed, right, by the question that was asked, that somehow, we can voluntarily control what we actually believe. But doxastic involuntarists seem to claim that, at least for the most part, no voluntary control over what we eventually end up believing. Okay. Why? Because it looks like emotions, desires, or let's say, I don't know, probably genetic factors might incline us to believe one belief over another. So that means we didn't really have control. It's not really up to us, right? But I believe this is my own personal view, that to some degree that I have some voluntary control over some of my beliefs. Some, not all. Assuming that such voluntary control is even possible. Okay. So let me give you an example here. Now, there are two kinds of doxastic voluntarism. One is what they call direct doxastic voluntarism, and the other one is indirect doxastic voluntarism. When you say that you have direct voluntary control over your belief, then you can cause yourself to believe something at will. Does that make sense? Right, so it's direct. And then if it is indirect voluntary control, it simply means that you can actually use several reasonings, evidences. You can consider all sorts of different things in order to cause you to believe a certain belief. So it's not direct, but you manage to persuade yourself to actually believe it because you are actually going through this process of considering evidences and rational justification. I hope I'm making sense here so far, right? I do think that voluntarism in belief is actually possible. I do believe that. Let me give you an example here. Okay. I think what happened to me when I was writing my doctoral dissertation on Kant, for example, I'm going to use this as an example, is that I started writing the dissertation without any clue about what exactly is my stance, right, on what Kant thought about the ontological proof, because that was my dissertation topic. So I approach it with no stance at all. And again, there's no significant stake here, right? Who cares, right? What Kant thinks about the ontological proof, and I actually didn't really care what he really thinks, also, in a way, right? So I approached the topic without any kind of clue what would have been what should be my stance on the matter. So what happened to me? Incrementally, I formed a view or a stance on what Kant thinks about the ontological proof, right? As I actually consider the passages from Kant's corpus, right? As I study the historical context, right? It gave me some kind of an idea of what should be my conclusion about the matter, right? So in that sense, it was voluntary. I was not inclined to believe one or the other. I actually ended up believing something because of the presence of certain passages, right? Which I didn't know before, but after I've known about it, then I was able to choose to believe one belief over another belief about what Kant thought about the ontological proof. So that's indirect, right? I didn't really believe that at will, like, oh, I'm going to believe it right now, right? No, it was a process that I have to go through in order to arrive at a particular stance. I know I'm sounding a little complicated here, but this is the only way I can think of answering the question. Now, but there's also a case of direct voluntary control, I think. Now, my example for this is, now suppose I'm running late to work, okay? And I will be deceiving myself into thinking, suppose I have to be at work at 9, and it's already, suppose it's a 30-minute drive, right? And suppose it's already 8:45, right? So it is to my advantage in a way, right, to actually deceive myself into thinking that I will still make it on time. Emotionally, I'll be drawn to that, right? Because I wanted to motivate myself. But what if I actually consider realistically, right? If it's a 30-minute drive, 15 minutes will not be enough. So I have to believe that I will be late. So I have to cause myself to believe that at some point, right? I hope I'm making sense here. So my belief that I will be late is something that I imposed on myself already. So in some sense, I directly, right, chose to believe that, or I directly choose to believe that, so that I don't need to rush anymore, right? And so because I ended up believing it, where it's actually probably it goes against what I wanted to be true. Right? If I want it to be true that I will be there on time, then I'll probably drive, I don't know, 90, 100 miles an hour, right, to get to work. But probably if I didn't do that, then that means I truly believe that I'm just late. Okay. Now, so those are the examples that I have in mind, right? That based on my example, it looks like voluntary control is actually possible to some extent. Okay, to some extent. Um, on the other hand, I think most of our beliefs are outside of our control. Okay, so I do think that for the most part, belief formation process is involuntary, right? With some aspects of it being probably voluntary, right? But probably in very, very few occasions where we have some kind of voluntary control about what it is that we end up believing. That's the reason why you are considered rational if you believe, right, what it is that you're supposed to believe. Not what you want to believe, right, but what it is that you're supposed to believe. Am I still making sense here, Laurence? Right? I'm not too complicated yet, right? Okay.
I don't think so. I think the audience can try to figure it out.
Okay. Yeah. So here's the thing. Okay. I primarily believe, right, that I believe in the Christian faith and theism because I was raised in the church. Okay. That's it. So it's somehow there's a big component of it is actually involuntary, right? I was conditioned to believe it. right? So probably the question that I need to ask is, how do I maintain that belief? And then after I figure out how I maintain those beliefs, then I can figure out what would it take for me to give it up. Does that make sense? Right. So how do I maintain those beliefs? Because I was already conditioned to believe it. I grew up in church, right? Let me give you three reasons here, okay, or three things, okay. I maintain my belief in Christianity and theism. One is because of my alleged, I'm calling it allegedly, right? Allegedly compelling personal experiences of God. So for example, I have this sense of I have this deep sense of calling, right, to serve as a pastor. Of course, I can't prove that to other people. That's just something that I have to deal with myself, right? A sense of calling. So if I can falsify that, then that will shake the foundation of my belief, because primarily I maintain my belief that there is a God and that the Christianity is true because I have this seemingly compelling experiences of God, right? So, for example, there are actually times when God provided for my needs when I was, I don't know, pursuing my education, right? So that I can be trained to do, theologically. I've seen it. I've seen it. I prayed, and literally, provisions come. Provisions came, right, in unexpected ways. I don't know if I'm making sense here. I'm not going to give you the detail, right? But I'm just simply claiming that this probably happened like more than three times, where I needed God's provision while I was actually in school, and somehow provisions came right at the right time. So every time I think about God, I'm like reminded of what happened during that time when, on a timely basis, whenever it is that I need some very, very important help, right? Somehow it comes. The help comes, okay, or it came, right? And I was saved from whatever financial trouble I have while I was actually in school, okay. But the problem here is this: I cannot really falsify those things anymore, right? Why? Because the longer or the more I am detached to those incidents in my life, then the more it's difficult for me to actually distinguish fact from fiction. Because it's possible that I am prone to embellish, right, my experience, because I literally felt that I experienced something there, right, that God was somehow providing for my needs. Now, so 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 how can I give up that belief? This is one of the reasons why, when I was a doctoral student, I became interested in the study of self-deception and epistemic irrationality. Because one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to figure out how to actually falsify, right, those kind of experiences that I had. Are you guys following me? Right? So so it's hard to. So, but the more I study about self-deception, right, the more I studied about epistemic irrationality, right, the more it became difficult for me to figure out whether I was even self-deceived or not, right? Because people are also disagreeing on whether self-deception is even possible, right? And so now I was not able to settle whether was I simply deceiving myself when I'm thinking that somehow God was providing my needs. So it becomes much more difficult for me to falsify those experiences now, right? Because I'm completely detached from it. It's like that's like what, 25 years ago. So I'm just relying on my memory, but I knew those were big experiences that I have in life. Now, another thing here is this. I maintain my relevant beliefs, like in the Christian faith, right, and in theism, through my constant fellowship with other believers. So I'm assuming what would it take for me to not believe those things anymore? Is that if I will be detached from the fellowship of believers. I don't know if that makes sense, right? So that's how we actually maintain our beliefs. Like the more you are in fellowship with other believers, then the more you strengthen those beliefs, and the more you are detached from the fellowship of believers, or like detached from the church, then the more you weaken, right, your capacity to actually believe a belief. So that's the reason why believing in God, right, at least in the New Testament sense, right, really has a lot to do with being a part of the church, right? I think it's hard to say that you believe in the Christian faith independently of the church, right? You always believe that, and you sustain that belief based on your constant fellowship with other believers. Now, another thing here is also this, and then I'm gonna end. So to give time to for Laurence to say something here. I also maintain my relevant beliefs through the persisting tolerability of my initial beliefs. Now, so for example, with Christianity, I think this is in what we mean when we say faith-seeking understanding, right? You start with certain beliefs as your initial beliefs, right? And you just simply try to figure out how far you can go in tolerating that belief, given the new experiences that you encounter. But as far as I can tell, okay, there's nothing about my experiences that seem to discredit my initial beliefs so far. Okay, and so I'm assuming one of the reasons why I might give up that belief is that if I encounter something that will make my current beliefs intolerable to me. I hope that makes sense, because you engage in the marketplace of ideas, and you try to test whether your beliefs are, is it still tolerable given evolution, given, I don't know, some current theories in the sciences, right? And so far as I can tell, right, there's nothing about my new experiences that seem to discredit my initial beliefs that there's a God, that somehow Jesus is, the one that God sent in order to actually save me from my sins and save other people from their sins, right? There's nothing about my new experiences that seem to discredit any of those beliefs. So that's why I don't have any reason to disbelieve them. However, if there will be a time when I cannot really tolerate those beliefs anymore, then probably that's the time I might have to give it up, because rationality will have to demand me to actually do that. I hope that's clear. And so lastly, I just wanted to point out here, I think I have a lot of reasons why I should disbelieve God. Okay, but I don't. I am not falling into that. Why? Because I really do think that those past experiences that I had were actually experiences with God, and I just have no way of falsifying them. And so, if there's anything that will really push me over the edge, right? Is, I think it's what I'll call this, and this might be offensive to some people. I will call this evangelical stupidity, right? And I didn't mean that to actually make fun of my evangelical brothers and sisters. I'm an evangelical myself, right? But I'm referring to, probably conservative evangelicalism. Why? Because I think the populist appeal of conservative evangelicalism, in some sense, pretty much messes up its intellectual, spiritual integrity in some sense, right? Because they are prone to believe things that we can easily consider to be false or demonstrably false. And it's not just that, but again, given the track record of evangelicalism, they seem to always get things wrong. It's just weird, right? I just find that weird, right? From the Scopes monkey trial, right, to civil rights movement, right, Nixon, racism, right? Somehow they end up with they get things wrong all the time, okay, and and I'm like having a hard time figuring out, right? Is there anything that they embraced, right, that I can really consider to be reasonable or uh, or rational, right? Throughout the history of conservative evangelicalism, I just can't find any. I don't know, and I think that shows that there's some kind of an inherent, right, stupidity, right, in the movement itself. Okay, now I am an evangelical, right? I'm not saying, but that's the reason why I gave up conservative evangelicalism, right? And so now I am in some kind of a non-conservative evangelicalism. Is there anything about it that I find to be potentially irrational? So far, I can't find any. That's the reason why I'm sticking with it, right? Yeah, so that's it. I hope I answered that question with a very long response here. Go ahead, Laurence. I don't know if you wanted to critique what I said or ask for clarifications.
I don't think I have any critiques,
Mm.
because belief is such a personal thing.
Mhm.
Like when I would invite the Mormons come in, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I ask them, how do they know that the Bible is true? They believe the Bible is true. They're trying to use it to contradict my Catholic faith.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why do you know the Bible is true? They'll say, well, Mormons would typically say, well, there's a movement in my heart. My heart tells me that this is true. Well, you ask a Muslim, they'll say the same thing. You ask any Christian, probably they'll say the same thing.
Mhm.
It's the movement of the heart. Well, how then they can't all be true because they contradict each other. So it has to be more than that. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, in my personal view, the answer is because, I can only speak for myself, right? My Catholic lens helps me to interpret the data that everyone else sees. I mentioned this last time. Whether you believe in predestination or not, whether you believe in God or not, the data is still the same. The whole reason why this debate is age old since the dawn of time is because the observation of the world is the same from every lens that has, followers that fall behind each belief system, right? The lens that they use, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, or whatever, it helps them to interpret the world around them, right? Somehow Buddhism helps them to understand why there's evil and why there's good, and why, and there's a balance between the two because of the yin and the yang. I don't believe in karma or yin yang and all that other stuff. It's just not my belief system. It doesn't strike me as meaningful from my own perspective, because I've been socialized to be, Christian and Catholic, and from a Western perspective and whatever. And this probably validates a lot of the claims that Richard Dawkins has, that, or any of the new atheists, right? You embrace the faith that you grew up in. Well, not true for everyone, right? Some people grow up Christian, they become Buddhist, and they become Hindu, and or vice versa. So it's not always the case, but probably their claim is to say you're more likely, right? So if you're raised Christian, you're likely to maintain that Christianity unless some kind of trauma happens, or you have a falling out with your parents and you want to be the total opposite of what they are and what they represent. I wanted to say a couple of things. A lot of things I jotted down as you were talking, just for my own, self-understanding, is that it's one thing if I had some kind of skin in the game, in the sense of, let's say I was a seminarian, let's say I was a priest, like I went that route and I was a priest. There would probably be a lot of pressure for me to maintain that belief system, even though I had strong doubts. Like under normal circumstances, if I were a layman in that scenario, then, which I am a layman, but you would have more pressure to maintain a belief in God and the truth of the Catholic Church, because you've already invested so much time and effort. In psychology, we call that effort justification. It's this warped experience of reality. Where, let's say, the practical example is someone who really loves a certain, has been waiting for this restaurant that has a lot of good reviews on the East Coast, and they're opening one up in Rancho Cucamonga, and so close by, and so you're waiting, at the edge of your seat for that restaurant to open, and you fall in line on the opening day. You wait 3 hours, and you go in there, and then you taste the food, and in your heart of hearts, you know it's not that great. But when you post about it on Facebook, it's like, oh, amazing! Here's a picture of my food, and you blow it up, right? Because that's the phenomenon of effort justification. You put a lot of energy into looking forward to that experience, and all other things being equal, it's not that great. But you convince yourself that it's so amazing because you put so much effort into it. So I was thinking to myself, well, there's plenty of reasons why it would have been easier for me to not become Catholic again. Plenty of reasons. But I'm not a priest. I'm not in the seminary. I've invested, well, I guess you could say, using the... you can say the example I gave already. I already invested lots of money in these Catholic theology books. But so what? I can resell them. What basis would I have to continue believing in this fantasy if I really didn't believe, if I really didn't have the faith in the stuff that's written in all these books that I reference all the time? I get nothing out of it. My career has nothing to do with religion or Catholicism. I sell some books, some religious books, whatever, but that's a drop in the bucket in terms of, if I just focused on my career, I'd probably be a director by now, making tons more money than I am. But I spend a lot of my time doing theology and religion for what, if I didn't believe in it? Now, there is the phenomenon of Protestant pastors, and probably Catholic priests too, who just keep going. There was a documentary I watched, part of it, I fell asleep through it, but it was basically a bunch of Protestant ministers who are afraid about their future and their family because they stopped believing years ago, but they're still operating as pastors. And what are they going to do with their MDiv? For those who only have the MDiv, there's no marketable thing for an MDiv in the secular world, unless maybe teaching high school religion, maybe, but still, you'd be teaching at a Christian school, and so you're still going to be some kind of hypocrite or some kind of, you're living a dual life or something like that. So I guess it goes back to my original statement, which is to say, the only thing that makes sense to me is I keep trudging along because of faith, and faith is a gift from God, and God's the one moving me to stick around, because there's plenty of reasons why, again, I would leave Catholicism. The Pope is not a sure footing for me. Let me be honest. The current Pope, that is, he teaches all sorts of weird stuff, and anyone who's really studied Catholic tradition, Catholic history, this Pope is probably going to go down in history as the worst Pope in history in terms of fidelity to Catholic teaching. Now, he's a great social worker. He says a lot of great things about the environment, about helping. Yeah, I'm not talking about that stuff. But in terms of what he's doing to the church, and in terms of liturgy and theology, he's probably going to go down in history as one of the worst. Not the worst morally. There's certainly been terrible popes in the past, but they were so busy with their concubines, and that they didn't teach error, which is the interesting thing about the Catholic apologetic these days. Is like, well, they never taught error, so it's like it maintains that papal infallibility doctrine because they never taught error, but their lives were not a manifestation of Christ-like behavior. So I don't think I have anything else in my notes here that I wanted to say. If I didn't have faith, when I was an atheist, I remember having a long conversation with Dr. Gallo after one of the classes, and I said, well, it's only because of faith I believe in free will. When I was an atheist, and I wasn't an atheist at the time I took her class, I was a determinist because I don't believe there's any way to defend free will in a non-theistic framework, in my opinion. Like, it seems like all indicators point to the idea that you have no free will. Now, maybe that's a topic for a future discussion only on philosophy, I suppose. I mean, theology could be a little difficult, but just philosophically, like, I just don't, I can't wrap my head around the idea that we make free decisions. Maybe I have my definitions wrong on what freedom is or what free will is, but I just don't. I only believe in free will because of faith, I guess is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So if my explanation was that God doesn't exist, and maybe for whatever secular reason, just for the sake of argument, God doesn't exist, why do I still maintain Catholicism? Well, probably because of all of the intersecting characteristics of how my life is today that keeps me going as a Catholic. Maybe my friendships, maybe maybe there's a good feeling that comes over me when I help people in understanding the faith. Maybe there's, all that stuff. That can happen without God. I can imagine that, right? God doesn't have to exist for all of that stuff to be true. And why a person can maintain, I mean, for the same reason why if Christianity was true, the Bible is true, why does a Buddhist stay Buddhist? Why does a Muslim stay Muslim? Why does it, you can explain those, that perseverance in those faiths by purely, psychological reasons. You don't need to have God, because I wouldn't claim that God works through Islam. That's not a belief that I have, where God works through any other religion other than the true religion. So I don't know. Sorry, Zion. No. I know you asked this question. I don't know if I gave it a clear answer, but
yeah,
that's the best I could come up with.
Yeah. So So one thing, I actually disagree with you about the Pope. My prediction is that he probably will be one of the best popes, right, of all time, because he's now
from a Protestant perspective, sure.
Yeah. He's making you guys
he's
more
destroying the Catholic Church.
You guys are. He's making you guys more like Protestants, right?
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Now, because Protestantism is the truth. I'm just kidding. Now, and again, a while ago, when we were talking about, whether this is just purely an emotional thing. That's why when I give you reasons, right, I was not just basing it on emotion, right? I was basing it on actual experiences that I have, right? That's one. And not just that, but I said you start with the belief and then you try to actually figure out how far you can tolerate those beliefs. So that means there's some kind of a rational element, right, into the maintenance of those beliefs. So it's not just conditioning yourself, like, being with the fellowship of believers, but there are also some rational element to it, right? The rational element being I'm looking at my personal experiences of God, right? And then the other one is that I'm trying to see whether I can tolerate this belief, right, in the midst of the marketplace of ideas, right? And so that's so I don't have to discredit the ideas of other people. I just need to make sure that my beliefs are somehow tolerable. In order for me to say that I can rationally hold on to those beliefs. So and so I think we tried to answer this question. I don't think that we have significant disagreements here about how we form this kind of beliefs. I think we both understand the spiritual aspect of it, that there's also some psychological factors involved in the formation of these beliefs, that this is not a purely rational thing, but some aspects of it can also be rational, I think. And I think.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, so now you said for your beliefs to be, you just need to make sure that it's the most tolerable. You don't necessarily have to discredit other religions.
No, I didn't say most tolerable. I said as long as it's just tolerable.
as long as it's tolerable enough for you,
Yeah.
but you feel no need to discredit other belief systems.
It's not that I don't feel the need, but I don't necessarily do it. Right.
I
I'm
see.
not going around and trying to discredit. I'm trying to discredit some beliefs, like I don't know, conservative evangelicalism,
I see.
because
Okay.
that's the one I have some kind of interest in that. But I don't go
Mm,
around and try to figure out how can I discredit the Buddhist or the Muslim.
I see. I
Yeah.
see.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So would you say that's an effort, that's a waste of time for someone who does do that? I mean, let's say they're
No, I
part
don't
of their
think so.
belief system, or part of the tolerability has to do with a confidence that this is the right one, and by it being the right one, it necessarily means the others are false in some way.
No, I don't see it that way. I don't treat
Okay.
it as the right one. I treat it as a reasonable one.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. But you can
The
have
most reasonable one.
not necessarily the most reasonable one, right? Because I might not be able to be a good judge of which one is most reasonable, given
I see.
that I will lack, the the competence, right, to evaluate other religions, right? So I
Why would
start with Christianity, and I just want to make sure that Christianity is, or at least my form of Christianity, right, is tolerable in a sense that I can still prove it to be reasonable, but I can prove it to be reasonable without necessarily discrediting other beliefs.
okay, so with what you know about Buddhism,
Hmm.
and you admitted in a previous episode when we talked about world religions that you don't know much about other world
Hmm.
religions,
Yeah, yeah.
but just but what you've learned from our discussion with I forget his name, but
Mark.
the good doctor,
Yeah.
um, is Buddhism, as you understand it, a reasonable belief?
Yeah. I really do think that. Whether it is more reasonable or less reasonable, I don't know. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So my concern is I grew up as a Christian, right? And I have experiences of God within within my religious context. And that's the reason why I believe in the God of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason why I believe in the God of Jesus, because of my experiences was within that context. So my task is to figure out how can I actually make it tolerable, right, in the middle of all of these different beliefs. So, but I
Right.
don't have to necessarily discredit the reasonability of the beliefs of other people in order to prove the reasonability of my belief, right? And so,
Sure.
why am I a
Sure.
Christian? Because I was born and raised in a Christian home, right? But I cannot divorce my understanding of belief formation process from that,
Mm.
right? And of course, at some point, if I find the Christian faith intolerable intellectually, right, then that's probably time to look at other views, right?
Mhm. Oh, okay. I think maybe I understand. So
Yeah,
you grew up as AOG, correct?
yeah, Assemblies of God.
So you maintain AOG, in somehow that conservatism, whether it's religion, but also politics. I'm sure
Hmm.
it led into politics.
Yeah.
But at some point, it became intolerable because there was some kind of crisis or whatever. Maybe not
Hmm.
a crisis. Maybe you won't
Yeah, it
describe it
is.
that way.
Hmm.
Okay, a
Yeah,
crisis.
yeah, yeah.
And so then it became intolerable. So you sought after another way of thinking within the Christian fold.
Yes,
Or maybe there was also a kind of agnosticism at some point, right?
yes, yes.
Flirting
Yeah,
with agnosticism.
yeah.
So something became intolerable, then you go to agnosticism, and then it became intolerable, and then then
No, I don't. I don't think.
back to Christianity.
I don't think agnosticism became intolerable for me. Right. I think what happened is, I was just always drawn to the church, right? Because I grew up in it, right? So that's why I said a while ago that we have to have some kind of a starting point. Okay, so I have to accept certain beliefs. I just have to make sure that it's defensible or they are
Mm.
defensible. It doesn't mean
I
I can prove their truth, right? But I can show that they're defensible.
see.
Yeah.
So
So
so then what would move you to, let's say we're going to interview an Orthodox priest next week. So what would it take? I'm
uh
going to twist Zion's question. What
yeah.
would it take for you to consider, I mean, what is that process of then, okay, well, maybe this evangelical thing is not right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Eastern Orthodoxy. If there's something about what he said that seems to, like, is there something because you're not searching for the most reasonable or the most correct or whatever it is, but somehow there's this passive experience or a passive response to something that happens. So let's say something he does say next week, Father so-and-so might say next week. Is that or in the realm of possibilities that then it's like, oh, okay, there's something
Yeah, of course, there's always
reasonable.
going to be some kind of a realm of, but I don't think it's gonna be with another religion, right? Because what happened is that religion is pretty much, it has some kind of an equal footing, right? Because there will always be claims in that particular religion that will be, you know, it's going to be hard to demonstrate, right? Whether it is more reasonable than others. But if there's some kind of a challenge to my belief, it might be coming from the sciences, or it might be coming from philosophy, rather than religion, right? So I see Christianity as epistemically, right, on equal footing with the other religions, right? Even Protestantism is on equal footing in relation to Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, right? And there's really no way for me to. Sorry, I keep on sniffling. Let me just ask for a paper towel here. Now, so I just have allergy because of the weather that we have here. Thanks, Stress. Now, so um, where am I? Now, so is there anything that, let's say, you or other Catholics can do to persuade me? I'm pretty sure there will be, there can be, right? There will be some reasons why I might change, right? But I don't see it. I don't see how will that be possible at this point, given that um, I seem to be persuaded that there's something in progressive evangelicalism. I find it to be reasonable, right? And if there is something about Catholicism, it might just be equally reasonable. So there might be no countervailing reason, right, why I need to change, right? Um, uh, yeah. At least that's what I'm thinking right now, right?
You want me to
Uh,
answer that question?
Go ahead.
Well, we have a home for you too. We have very progressive Catholics
Yeah.
that you quote all the time that I've never heard of. So,
Who's that? Who's that?
so you mentioned some
Oh
theologians
yeah,
from
yeah, yeah,
Boston College or
yeah,
Notre
yeah,
Dame.
yeah,
Oh, they're Catholic. You think they'd be Catholic? They're
yeah,
Catholic.
yeah.
So just come on in. We'll take care of the details later. You just need to sign the papers. That's all. And then I'll tell you why they're wrong. No.
Yeah.
Is there any reason? Well, I've mostly abandoned my apologetical style of. I've mentioned this several times before.
Yeah.
I mean, if we really wanted to get into that mode, I have plenty of material. This whole shelf is Protestant apologetics. Actually, these two shelves are Protestant apologetics. But the thing about it is, I should say, Catholic apologetics answering Protestant claims. The thing about your particular situation is you don't hold to the classical Protestant doctrines that divide Catholicism and Luther said, or was it Luther or Calvin, that there was the twin doctrines that the Reformation stands or falls is sola scriptura and sola fide. I don't think we've talked about sola fide so much, faith alone, but we've talked about sola scriptura and you'll believe it. So I wouldn't know how to engage you in apologetics. My suspicion would be it would have to be on historical grounds. and a leap of faith on top of that, because I think you've already said several times that you have no problem calling the Catholic Church Mother Church, as possibly, or even in actuality, the successor of the church that Christ founded.
Yeah.
So it's not on that basis. It's usually been, what I've heard from you is usually kind of pointing to where you interpret the actions of the Catholic Church or the magisterium as erroneous, like it made mistakes. And so I would probably have to delve deep into that to talk about, well, let's define what a mistake is. Let's define what infallibility is. Is it because the popes had concubines and had illegitimate children? Is that what makes the Pope, the Pope, or does it discount, or the Crusades or the Inquisition? There are answers to those questions. Now, would it be compelling to you? I don't know. I haven't studied it enough to be able to give that answer to you.
Yeah.
The answers are there.
Yeah.
But I also suspect, though, that there is this threshold, kind of like how Robert Stanley said something like, everyone has a number, right? Remember him saying that? He said, everyone has a number. He thinks the Pope has 356 or whatever it is, but his number was about 20 red flags, and that was it for him. So there might be that number for you. I just don't know what it might be.
Yeah, of course, there will be something like that, I think. Although I think what the stumbling block for me, right, when it comes to Catholicism, let's say, right, is probably the unnecessariness of some of its beliefs and practices, right? I just think that there are so many unnecessary beliefs and practices, right? And I'm assuming the liberal Catholics, right, don't necessarily believe all of those, anyways, too, right? So they probably don't practice those what I would consider to be unnecessary. So and so I probably the difference between a progressive Catholic and a progressive Protestant or a progressive evangelical somehow get dissolved at some point, right? So I don't think they are necessarily drastically different, right? Yeah. So that's why I said, if ever one becomes a Catholic, right, like me, right, it might be on the progressive end of Catholicism, or the progressive end of Orthodox faith, right? Because I don't think, I think what really separates Christianity has something more to do with the progressive and the conservative side of Christianity. Because I think the conservative ones, they seem to think alike in some sense, right? In the same way that the progressive ones seem to think alike in some sense, to some degree, right? So it might be an easier transition from progressive Protestant to or progressive evangelical to progressive Catholicism.
Yeah, there's they've done psychological studies on that before, relating to corporal punishment, and they found that there's more in common between conservative Hindus and conservative Christians, rather than between the conservative and liberal sides of their own religion, right? So, and it has more to do with, do you actually believe, I mean, it boils down to this: do you actually believe the tenets of your belief system, right? So how those researchers were defining it is that the liberal Christian versus the conservative Christian goes to church regularly and believes that their scriptures are true. The liberal Christians on the other end of the spectrum don't necessarily go to church regularly and actually don't believe that their scriptures are entirely true. And so in the same way that you could divide the Hindu camp in the same way. They believe their scriptures are true, or they're not true, or they're not entirely true, right? So then it becomes this kind of, well, sometimes picky and choosy kind of a thing.
But for me, I think I'm using the word progressive here, not in the sense of liberal, right? I'm using it in the sense of being like they're like the moderate, theologically moderate group of people, because yeah, because people like me who is a progressive evangelical, then I will say that yeah, the scripture is true, right? But of course, you will have to ask the question: true in what sense, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that probably where it might differ, right? But they're definitely not like the liberals who might not even consider the Bible as authoritative. But people like me, I treat the Bible as authoritative, not inerrant, right? But authoritative, nevertheless, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if it boils down to the number of religious claims that are necessary, right? So we're supposed to debate about this at some point:
Yeah. Yeah.
doctrinal minimalism
Yeah.
versus maximalism, or at least whatever it may be, and however that shakes out in the end, in terms of the arguments. If if it can be demonstrated that whatever church is true, whether it's, well, I mean, the only ones that could make this claim of a historical church is either the Orthodox Church or a Catholic Church, right? In terms of its historicity and its own claims to its own authority,
Yeah.
then it would, if you can demonstrate that there is a church, right? I guess scripturally. See, but that's the thing. We still have to start off with whether the Bible is true, because then we can point to the scriptures and make some kind of apologetical claims to say that it was founded on Peter and all this other stuff. Other than that, I mean, you would just have to kind of have to have a leap of faith, to just believe the Catholic Church is that authority.
No,
Because
again, remember, I think
preserve the Bible.
I mentioned that before, right? By claiming that historically, right, Catholicism is probably the mother church, historically speaking, right? But that does not necessarily mean, right, that they are the persistent bearer of the truth, right? Given that it's also part of history of the church, right? That Catholicism failed many times, right? They failed to become, they failed to be the faithful witness to that truth. So that means the fact that historically one is the initial bearer of the faith, right? I don't think that that necessarily mean that they become the persistent bearer of that faith throughout time, right? In the same way that Judaism was somehow replaced by Christianity when it comes to being the bearer supposedly of biblical truth, right? There should be nothing that should prevent us from thinking that probably some other groups of people must have replaced, right, Catholicism, right, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, right. And of course, that would be the claim of the Protestants, right, that they became the bearer of that truth at some point. Because of the some of the abuses that are not necessarily inherent in Catholicism, right? These are just probably just what happened in Germany, right?
Well, to be fair to Luther and Calvin, I don't think they would say that Calvin is now, I am now the bearer of truth because I have authority, and now it's transferred to the Lutheran Church or the Calvinist Church or the Presbyterian Church or anything like that. I think their claim would be to say the truth is in the Scripture entirely, and that's our only authority. And the only way we can access that truth is if we interpret the scriptures properly. Apart from dogmas and doctrines and the magisterium, everyone has the right to start interpreting the scriptures for themselves. And so get a copy of the Bible in Greek if possible, I suppose. Learn some Greek, so that you can get closer to the proper understanding of the scriptures. So I don't think their claim would be the authority is the Lutheran Church or the Presbyterian Church. The authority is in the Bible. And that's why Catholics can be true Christians from their perspective, as long as they can start reading their Bible apart from the popish interpretations.
But again, the way they behave, they didn't seem to behave in that way, right? When Calvin authorized the the burning at stake of Miguel Servetus, for example, right? He saw himself not just as, it's not as the, as probably the primary, right, interpreter of the text. That's why he can make some kind of a judgment on who are the heretics, right, who deserve to die or something like
I,
that.
I guess what you're saying. I get what
Yeah.
you're saying.
So and as a matter of fact, they were also prone to fundamentalistic claims, right? Claiming that probably they're the ones who get things right, right? Their
Mm.
group, whatever that is, right? So yeah, so and
It's no
again,
surprise. It's no surprise from a Catholic perspective why that happened.
say it again.
Because it's no surprise from a Catholic perspective why that happened.
Okay.
Because we would say the fundamental claim is that they had is incorrect. Sola Scriptura is not correct
Mhm.
from a Catholic perspective. So you can't just have everyone as becoming their own pope. And that's what Luther actually ended up saying. He said, I tried to get rid of one pope, now I got 20.
Mhm.
When really it's me. So what he's really saying is me, Luther. I'm the one that should be able to interpret it. But that becomes the issue. And that's really the core of Catholic apologetics, is that idea. Like, we can't just become our own interpreters, because then anybody can interpret it any way they want.
But
Um,
but even within Catholicism, right? There are also uh, competing interpretations of text, right?
yeah, but those interpretations are not the actual authority. That really is where we need to, really fine tune that understanding. Just
Mm.
because Raymond Brown from something university, Father Raymond Brown, is the biblical, seen as a biblical authority.
Yeah.
The authority in the Catholic Church is not the exegetes. It's the interpretation of the magisterium, right? So theologians can say whatever they want, and then the church can look at that and say, okay, that's a good explanation, right? Just like Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas wrote a Summa Theologica, but not all of his writing was incorporated into official church teaching, except for, the obvious one is Eucharist, right? The transubstantiation doctrine was interpreted. So very few things have actually been defined by the Catholic Church. So there's a lot of,
But again, you were mentioning a while ago about Pope Francis, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
well, yeah, that's true.
so those things, those kinds of possibilities still exist, right, within the Catholic Church. The fact that you can centralize the official theological judgment, right, on Pope and a certain group of bishops, let's say, right.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean that guarantees that you get one teaching, right?
that's true.
The mere fact that Pope Francis is somehow I don't know, revolutionizing Catholicism, right? Whether that's negative or a positive revolution, right?
Yeah,
That tells you that those kind of tendencies still exist, right? Even within the Roman Catholic Church.
you're right.
Yeah,
But a layman like myself would know
yeah,
when to not listen to Pope Francis. See, the real problem is, look, 60 years ago, we didn't have internet.
yeah,
So 60 years ago, nobody even knew who the Pope was. I mean, hardly anybody. I mean, you didn't have internet. There was some like Catholic saints who were like, it was documented that somebody asked them, do you know who the Pope is? And they're like, I don't know who the Pope is. What's their name? They don't know, because you didn't have internet, right? So your experience as a Catholic in the 15th century, in the 5th century even, was the local parish,
yeah,
right? So the local parish priest, his obligation was to teach the supposedly unchanging Catholic faith that's been handed to him, right?
yeah,
So the ordinary layperson like myself didn't need to worry about what Pope Leo XIII said, because the trust was that whatever Pope Leo XIII dogmatized or taught officially would trickle down to the bishops, and the bishops would trickle it down to the priests, and then the priests would teach it at your local parish in the form of sermons,
uh-huh,
right? But nowadays, Pope Francis, every whim that he has, every fleeting thought he has, he tweets. Pope Francis is the Trump of the Catholic Church.
Except he doesn't like Trump.
Yeah, but he doesn't like him because he probably sees himself in the mirror. But basically, from a conservative Catholic perspective, he is the Donald Trump of the Catholic hierarchy. Because every fleeting thought, it's just But that's the thing. The authority is not every fleeting thought the Pope says, because he's not infallible in that sense. The belief is he's infallible in official doctrinal definitions, and that's very rare. And Francis has never used that authority in his entire pontificate, and neither has Benedict XVI, and neither has John Paul II. It's very rare when that actually happens.
Yeah, but still, I think even that teaching alone, right, seemed to ignore, right, certain limits to humans. That's the reason why you can't really precisely state a doctrine, right? Because eventually, at some point, there are certain nuances, right? You can state a claim like as clearly as you can possibly do it, but it will always be open for all sorts of interpretations, right? You just look at the U.S. Constitution, probably one of the most carefully phrased, right, claims, right, you find in that Constitution. But still, you still need lawyers, you still need Supreme Court justices, right, to figure this thing out, because that's just the inherent nature of language, right? The inherent nature of language is just it's just ambiguous, right? There is always something going to be ambiguous or vague about any claim, right?
Right.
Yeah. So even the official declaration of the Pope, right, is it's not something that it is covered, right, by God, right, by the Spirit, so that it will only be interpreted in one way, because it will still be, not clear. And some aspects of it will not be clear. Some aspects of it will still be ambiguous.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of ways in which the modern Catholic Church communicates its teaching, which lends to ambiguity.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the Council of Trent, for example, which is a dogmatic council of the Catholic Church, it's very clear what it's talking about. Like, it's not like flowery language like Vatican II. It basically says, here is an assertion, anathema. Here's a claim, anathema. Here's a claim, anathema. That is what, it's propositional. The historical Catholic Church was very propositional and very, very clear. I would imagine, from what I've studied anyway. I haven't seen any pre-Vatican II documents that were unclear, but certainly Vatican II and after Vatican II documents are very ambiguous, and it's honestly, just to go back to the original question, that's what troubles me. For as far as my maintaining Catholicism, what troubles me is that the Church has departed from its ways since the 1960s, after the Second Vatican Council. It became very unclear, very ambiguous. So many documents. Who has time to read all of these papal documents? Nobody has time, to read all this. I can barely read the Bible, let alone read more papal documents that ultimately say nothing of how I should change the way I act or behave or believe. I don't need to read a 150-page document. It's ridiculous.
At least as a doctrinal minimalist, I don't really have to worry about any of that.
Oh my gosh. I think Zion did it. I think he has undone my Catholicism, and you're all witnessing it right now. It's that is truly what frustrates me is so many documents, and the bishops don't all agree on how to. There are bishops now, there are cardinals who are disagreeing with Francis on lots of things and questioning him, and now actually questioning some of them privately, questioning whether or not he's actually even Pope.
See, you guys are just hiding your Protestantism.
It's complicated. Yeah, no, it's probably no. I mean, you need to have. I mean, in the history of the church, there have been multiple popes. Like one is the true pope, and the other ones are called anti-popes. But it's hard to determine whether or not which one is the anti-pope in the moment. So they ended up deciding that later on. But everyone had their champion saints that supported the either an anti-pope or a true pope. But they don't know, because to be a good Catholic, it's not to follow as if you're idolizing the Pope. That's a misunderstanding. We're not supposed to idolize the Pope as if he's Jesus Christ himself. He's not. He's a stand-in. He's a vicar, right? And so his role is to preserve. And when he's not preserving, then you start questioning what is he doing if he's not preserving the tradition. Anyway, this is becoming way far away from the question of
so I think that's it. So it's really a good conversation here. Yeah, it's always fun to have theological conversations. You end up with this never-ending, hair-splitting discussions, right? But they're good. Okay, they're good for the soul. They're good for the mind. They're good for the heart. And so again, we want to thank you for joining us here, me and Laurence, and then hope to see you guys next week as we interview an Orthodox priest, right? Eastern Orthodox priest. We're gonna talk about what is Eastern Orthodox Church, how is it even related to the Catholic Church, right? And it's probably less related to, right, the Protestantism, right? Because Protestantism came from the Roman Catholic Church, right? So we're a bit more detached from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. Now, and we will also ask our Father Ananias Sorem about the role of religion, right, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So make sure you watch us next week, and I hope you will enjoy it as well. So again, thank you. God bless you guys. See you next week. Bye.